Today's stuff we're going to learn is Eruvin Samachay. We're going to start at the very, very bottom of Samach Dalet Amud Bet. I just want to refresh your memory. We started yesterday talking about people drunk and the difference between people who are drunk and then we said, I just want to remind, right, we got to here really on a tangent because we had that whole thing with Rav Nachman who said, oh, that's good what you taught and that's not good what you taught. I didn't like that limud, that halacha that you taught. And we got from there because he started with Eruv and then he moved to the Sechiro Velakito. If somebody is renting your place, right, or is a hired laborer, even he can rent out the non-Jew's place on behalf of the non-Jew. And then the second thing he said was about drinking wine and that you shouldn't teach when you're drinking wine. From there, we moved on to davening, that you shouldn't daven when you're drunk. And I wanted to just bring two reasons why one shouldn't daven when they're drunk. One, and there's two different approaches, and this will affect what we're going to talk about today. One reason one shouldn't daven when one is drunk is because it's like we said before, what does it mean to be drunk? It means you wouldn't stand before a king that way. Well, if you wouldn't stand before a king, it's right. We even said it was despicable to daven in front of God when you're drunk because you would never appear before God looking like that. That's really inappropriate. But another reason is that you can't have the proper intent. And that's something that in Daf Yomi this week they discuss, and that's really what's going to come up in the Gemara today. Okay, there's a bunch of tricky things about how to interpret things in the beginning of today's daf, a bunch of different interpretations. I'll try to maybe simplify, maybe a little mention the others, but kind of stick with one way of reading, because otherwise it just gets too confusing. So Amar Rav Sheshet Mishum Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. I always say this because sometimes you might have a different commentary that says something different entirely, and don't be alarmed because there's often just different interpretations. Amar Rav Sheshet Mishum Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. So Rav Sheshet says in the name of Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, Yachol ani liftor et kol ha'olam kulo min adin miyom shecharav beit hamikdash v'ad achshav. There's a crazy line. I could have exempted everybody, okay, from the time of the destruction of the temple till now. Shene'amar lechu shim'un azot aniyah v'shikoret v'lo miyayin. Yeshayahu says, listen to me, you impoverished and drunken ones. And you're drunk not from wine. In other words, you're drunk from sadness, okay? It's a certain state of mind from after the destruction, the state of sadness that's like being drunk. And then you could have been exempt from everything because you're in the category of a drunk. So the Gemara says, wait a minute. There's a contradiction from a Talmudic source. When you're drunk, you're exempt from everything, from the law. And this is a fascinating thing. And if you look up in any system of law, they deal with what do you do with a drunk person who, murders, who are they responsible or not? Could they claim I wasn't in control? So let's see what the halacha says. Shikor mikol mekach umemkaro memkar. If you sell or purchase something, you can't say later, oh, I didn't mean to. I was drunk when I did that. Avar avera sheyesh b'mita. If you did any sin for which you're obligated the death penalty, mimitinoto, you get the death penalty. Malkot, malkinoto, lashes, you get lashes. Klaloshal davar, the general principle is hareu kipikech l'chol dvarat. He's basically considered clear-minded for anything. We make him responsible. Ella, there's only one thing, shepatur minat tefillah, other than being exempt from prayer, which we said could be either because it's totally inappropriate or because he can't properly have the right intent. So what do they answer? How do they resolve this question? So how did he say, I could have exempted you from the law? What do you mean? There is no exemption from the law. Ma yacholni liftor the kamar, nami midin tefillah. Oh, it also means I could have exempted you from prayer. In other words, theoretically, people maybe don't even need to pray. Okay, again, it's hard to imagine they really mean you don't need to pray. Likely it means, in the way most of the Mepharshim take it, is you don't need to have the proper intent when you pray. Okay? Amar Rabbi Chanina, lo shanu ela shelo higia l'shechruto shalot. That's only, though, if you're drunk to the state where you haven't gotten as drunk as Lot got. Remember Lot and his daughters came and slept with him when he was drunk. He didn't even realize they were his daughters. That's clearly a deep state of drunkenness. Once you get to that stage, you're actually exempt from everything. Obviously, you have to, who knows where that stage is. It's a question. Interestingly, they say you're actually exempt from everything. I looked up some things about the law. So I saw that in some places they distinguish between a law that obligates you with if you have general intent, or certain things you do, like let's say murder, you have to have specific intent to have done that act in order to be obligated. in, first degree murder or however you call it. So there's a difference. If you need general intent, then one who's drunk is intended, they do have general intent, but you can't say that they have specific intent, and therefore you won't be convicted on the highest level if you do that. Okay, so like I saw a good example where a woman, her husband cheats on her and she goes and she murders someone. Her husband cheats on someone. She goes, gets totally drunk because she's all upset. Then she goes, she has a gun. She goes to his house, finds him with the woman, and she kills him. So is that intent or not? So they distinguished, I thought it was a good distinction. Did she buy the gun right before she went to the bar to drink, let's say, or before she got drunk? If she bought the gun before, then it would show she had specific intent to kill him. If she just happened to, I don't know how many women walk around with guns normally, but she happened to just have the gun, or she took the gun after she was drunk already, then she wouldn't necessarily be responsible. That also differs in different places, obviously, but this is one type of way of looking. I see in the chat, there's some things going on about different things about it. Anyway, this is a very interesting topic about how responsible we make somebody. And, once they're drunk, because obviously they got themselves into a drunken situation. So theoretically, they should be responsible for having gotten themselves drunk. On the other hand, to what extent are they responsible for the actions after? So anyway, these are all good questions, how to view this. Okay. Amar Rabbi Chanina. This is a very hard line to understand. I'm going to explain it the way Rabbeinu Hananel understands, which is quoted in the Steinsaltz, even though there's other ways to understand. Kol amapik magem, what we're going to have is two ways of reading this line and what mapik means in each case. Mapik can mean different things in each case. Kol amapik magem b'shach ga'ava, sugrim v'chotmim tzarot ba'ado. This, all the commentaries, like everything, when you have a lot of different interpretations, because it's very hard to understand and there's difficulties with any perush. So if you have some difficulties with this, there's no perfect explanation here. Anyone who suppresses magain, here they say it means suppresses your evil inclination, basically. Bishat gava, when you're drunk. If even while you're drunk, you can suppress your evil inclination. Today, we're going to see all different sides to being drunk, that there's people who it brings out the good in them, it's people who it brings out the bad in them, as we all know. So if you suppress your evil inclination while you're drunk, so green b'chotmin sarop ado, you will basically be protected, right? That's like a good thing that you're able to do that. Shneamar ga'ava afike miginim sagur chotam tzal, right? So the pride of the afike miginim. Okay, let me actually see how to translate this in English. I know how to translate the pshat of this pasuk in English. 1 second. Okay, the channels of his scales are his pride, closed together as with a tight seal. So the way they understand it is, okay, to say that when you're in your time of arrogance, that's your ga'ava, then, which they understand to mean when you're drunk, okay, because when you're drunk, it's a bit of arrogance to drink. And then you pass a shield over your evil inclination. Basically, you pass over your evil inclination, then your troubles become closed and sealed before you. Okay, they're basically sealed away, and they won't come out. So now they want to know, how did you get from afikim, which are usually channels, okay, of water? How did you get from there? It means if you suppress. How do you get that, or pass over? My brothers were traitors to me, like a river, like the channels of the brook, ya'avoru, they will pass. So here you see it passes. Okay, so that's how they get it. Rabbi Yochanan has a different explanation. He says, Kol she'eino mapik itmar. Okay, now it's very tricky what he means, Kol she'eino mapik. So again, this is the weakness in Rabbeinu Hananel, but the way he understands it is someone who doesn't who basically doesn't cover it up, like in the other one, like go over it, but he's mapik, he brings it out like a shield. He comes and he fights against his evil inclination. One is he kind of suppresses it, and the other is he fights out against it. Itmar. So my mashbadahai mapik lishn digilule, he reveals it. Okay, he basically reveals it and deals with it. Right, the afikemayim, the channels are revealed, they're seen. So here you see afikim is something that's seen. Okay, so you basically reveal them. So now they say, Michte Krai Mashma, Bein Lamar, Bein Lamar, since the pasuk, each one has a verse to prove their reading of Afikim, their understanding, my Benayu. So what's the difference between them? Ika Benayu de Rav Sheshet. Let's see this case of Rav Sheshet. By the way, just to mention as an aside, some people say Magen is prayer. And one is saying you should pray even when you're drunk. And right, so if you manage to pray even when you're drunk with intent, that's great. And then different ways of prayer, like are you supposed to suppress it? Are you supposed to reveal, and actively pray or not? That's part of one of the other interpretations. But in any case, let's go on. So what's the difference? Rav Sheshet. Rav Sheshet maser shein teleshame. He told the shamash to wake him up. In other words, he went to sleep drunk for a little bit, and he said, "But wake me up soon, okay? Or wake me up bichlal." Okay, it depends which interpretation you take. Whether the idea is that he told him to wake him up and didn't let him sleep forever, until he woke up on his own, or some people say no, he went to sleep. The point is he went to sleep rather than dealing with it, and this is going to fit Rabbeinu Hananel, where Mar Ilei Derav Sheshet Umar Leitlei Derav Sheshet. So Rabbi Yochanan, who says you should fight against it, doesn't agree with Rav Sheshet because Rav Sheshet went to sleep. He kind of avoided dealing with it, where he thought the best way to get rid of my evil inclination is just to sleep and suppress, my evil inclination. Whereas Rabbi Yochanan said, no, you're supposed to actually face it, and that's against Rav Sheshet, who went to sleep. He thinks, no, not suppress it. You're supposed to fight against it. So you shouldn't just go to sleep. You should deal with it. Okay, it's again, many different ways to read the sugya, so I'm going to leave it at that. Amar Chia bar Ashi Amarav, Kol she'ein da'atom yushevet alav, al yitpalel. If you aren't clear-headed, then you shouldn't, if you're not in a calm state of mind, you shouldn't pray. Right? This is going to lead to a lot of us saying, well, wow, I'm very rarely in that state. Maybe I shouldn't be praying. Hold off on that. We'll talk about it at the end. Where do we get this? Mishum shenemar, but sal al yored. When you're in sarah, when you're in a time of you're troubled, then don't teach. And they learn not only don't teach, but also don't rule, right? Not only that, but also don't pray. So now we're going to see about a bunch of different rabbis. Rabbi Chanina b'yom deratach, if he was angry about something, lo matzli, he wouldn't pray. Amar betzar al yorektiv. He said, based on this verse, he wouldn't pray if he was in a state of anger. Mar ukva b'yom deshota lo hava nafik lebeidina. When he was in a day of anger, I'm sorry, shota is the wind. When it was this south wind blowing, he wouldn't go to the courts, okay? Lo nafik lebeidina. He wouldn't go to judge. Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, Hilchata bayat silute kiyoma da'astana. He said, in order to paskin halacha, you need to be clear-headed like a clear, calm day. Okay, Yoma de'istana, Rashi says, is when the ruach tzfonit blows, and it's a orahu v'noach lakol. It's like one of these calm, peaceful days. That's how clear-headed you need to be in order to paskin halacha. Amar Abai, I amar li aim. Lo tenai. I wouldn't learn if my mother, now it's not his mother, remember his mother died, it's his omenet. He always calls her aim, even though she was really his, the woman who took care of him. So Amr li aim, kariv kutcha, if she said, bring me kutach, and I knew I had something in my mind to do, lo tenai, I wouldn't be able to learn. I wouldn't be able to focus. This we saw the other day also. This rabbi couldn't have focused that day. Remember, he was learning. He would teach him. He had to teach him 400 times because he couldn't focus. He was thinking because the rabbi they said, we need you for a mitzvah. And he was very distracted. Same thing. Says, just if they asked me that, she says, I need you to get me kutach. Remember that kutach habavli, that disgusting thing they would use? They would dip their bread in it. So anyway, if she says that, I already can't focus on my learning. Amarava, ikratztan kina lo tenai. If I had lice in my clothing, I wouldn't be able to focus. Marbury Ravina, so now we're going to learn about Marbury Ravina. Avdele Ime, his mother made him, and we have all these mothers here, or people who take care of them, or they take care of them. So says, Sheva Mane L'Sheva Yome. She prepared him 7 different pieces of clothing for each of the 7 days of the week so that he could change his clothes every day so that he didn't end up with lice bugs in his clothing. And that way he'd be able to focus on his learning, right? What a dedicated mother who makes sure he's got what he needs to be able to focus. Amar Rav Yehuda, Lo Ivrei Lelia Ela L'Shenta. The night was, okay, now we're moving a little bit. We'll get back to here, but it's the same idea. What's unique about night? Night is a time for sleeping, basically. Don't learn at night, right? Because why? Well, you're tired. When you're tired, you can't learn properly. Okay, this happened to me. I was trying to prepare the daf last night. I was exhausted. And then I'm reading this line, and here it says, night is not a good time for preparing. And I'm thinking, yeah, I should probably go to sleep and wake up early and do it. But we have a different opinion. Rav Shimon ben Lakish, lo ivrei sira ela legirsa. Why was the moon created? To learn at night, to be able to have moonlight so people could learn at night, right? Obviously in the day when they don't have electricity. So the moonlight was what they used. And he basically says, and this is a whole approach, and you see this all over, about is it better to learn at night? Some of the commentaries talk about it's better to learn at night. Why would you think it's better to learn at night? On the one hand, you're tired. On the other hand, people who are night people know this, and even people who aren't night people, what happens at night is, right, during the day, you're worried about all the worries about the day. And, and you're thinking, if you're not working, maybe I should be working, or there's, if you're trying to, nowadays, many people work at home, right? And you're distracted by, there's laundry to do, and there's dishes, and there's meals to make, and it's very hard to focus. But at night, all that is not happening, and the kids are all sleeping, and it's good quiet time. You don't have people bothering you. People like to, people go to their office at nighttime because it's quiet in their office and they can get things done, or they work in their house at night. It's just a quiet time. So it's a good time to learn because you're not distracted by all sorts of other things. So this is a big debate. Should you sleep at night or should you learn at night? Now, obviously, why is there a big debate about this? Because different people are different ways. So the rabbis who obviously were night people talked about how important it is to learn at night. And the people who can't function at night were probably saying, no way, night is time for sleeping. Amrele Rabbi Zera. So the two of them had this disagreement. So they went to Rabbi Zera. They said, Mechadidim shmatach. We all know it's a little difficult to learn from one person's example. But anyway, they go to him and they say, listen, you're really sharp. When do you learn? Like, tell us your secrets. Amar lehu diyama meininu. I learn during the day. Okay, and those are my secrets. Amar le barte to Rav Chisda le Rav Chisda. So the daughter of Rav Chisda says to Rav Chisda, lo ba'imar meinam porta. Don't you need to sleep a little bit, right? Why do you never sleep? It's crazy that you don't sleep, she says to him. Right? For me, it's the reverse in my house. I say it to my daughter who never sleeps. So, it's like, don't you ever need to sleep? So here she says it to her father. Amarla, hashta atu yome da ariche uktine venenum tuva. A day will come when the days will be, right, there'll be time when the days are very short and basically I won't have any time to learn. What's he saying? So either it was in the summer months and he was saying now the days are long and I have more opportunity to learn because again, they didn't have lights at night. So it was harder to learn. It's hard to learn how many hours can you learn by candlelight. So either he was saying when the winter days come and they're shorter, then I'll sleep more. Or he's basically saying, right, this is your classic person who says, time is short and, there'll be a time when I won't be able to learn when I'm dead. And therefore, I'm going to take advantage of the time I have in this world and I'm going to do the most that I can. Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, Anan po'alei diyamama Anan. He says, we work during the day. Rav Acha bar Yaakov yazif upara. He would basically borrow time. What he would say is if I didn't, or he would do like this, if I didn't have enough time to learn during the day, then I would finish at night what I was supposed to get through that day. Okay, so he would maybe learn during the day, but if he didn't finish it, then he would learn at night. If he, maybe didn't have enough time, he was busy working longer hours, then he would go and make sure to learn during the night. Amar Rabbi Eliezer, Haba min haderech. Okay, we're back to having proper intent. Al yitpalel shlosha yamim. Wait 3 days. Then daven. Again, probably doesn't mean you're exempt from tefillah, but you don't need to have the proper intent during your davening. Shneimar v'akabtzem el hanahal habal achva. This is Ezra gathered the people. V'nechne sham yamim shlosha v'avinam ba'am. And we'll camp there for 3 days, and I will avina ba'am. Then I'll understand who the people are. Okay, I just want to point out, I wasn't sure if it was Rabbi Elazar. Yeah, it's Rabbi Elazar, not Rabbi Eliezer. Sorry, my mistake. It's Rabbi Elazar, who's the Amora, okay, from Eretz Israel. So he says, wait 3 days. He said, basically, right, I'm going to camp there for 3 days, and then I'll start understanding who the people are. Avua d'shmuel. So here you see, he wasn't going to be clear-headed for 3 days. Avua d'shmuel ki ate ba'orcha, when he was walking on a path, lo matzle tzlata yomi. He wouldn't pray for 3 days. Shmuel lo matzle bebeita di'ipe shich, right? He wouldn't pray in a house where there was beer because of the smell. Rav Papa lo matzle bebeita di'ipe harsana. Also, there was a very strong smell of the. Oh, so by the way, Rashi says the smell of the beer made him intoxicated. Okay, just the smell of it intoxicated him. And the second one is the bad smell of the fish. The fish smell is so strong. It's a bad, right? We all know you go to a fish store. Can you imagine trying to daven in a fish store, right? It's got that very strong stench. So he basically wouldn't pray when there was a smell. So here we now get to not just, right? You need to get thoughts out of your head. You need to, not be exhausted from the derech, from traveling. And also the place where you are, if there's things that the smells that are distracting you for whatever reason, also go pray somewhere else. Amar Rabbi Chanina. Now we get to this issue about some people wine being good for them and some people wine not being good for them. Amar Rabbi Chanina. If the wine calms you and creates a situation where you might have been angry with someone and now you're going to be at peace, you'll come to peace with them, then that's like God. How do we see this? This is by Noach. He smelled the sacrifice that Noach brought, and then he said, "Okay, I won't ode." Right? This is after the flood. Lo sif lekalel odet ha'adama bavor ha'adam. Right? Even though kiyetzer lev ha'adam ra minu rav, even though people are bad from their evil from their youth, but I'm still not going to curse them anymore. And that's because he smelt this reach nichach and he was appeased by that, calmed him down. So therefore, if the wine brings you to a good place, right? Sometimes you get together with someone, let's drink a little wine, well, you'll be able to have a good conversation. So that's one thing. Amar Rabbi Chia, kol hamityashev b'eino. If remember, Rav Nachman said yesterday that I'm more clear-headed when I drink a little bit of wine. So if it makes you clear-headed, yesh bodat shivim skinim. You're zochet to have the mindset of the 70 elders that were in the time of Moshe. How do we get to the 70 elders? Well, now we're going to play a gematria game where we count the value of the letters. Yayin nitam ba'ayin otiot. The value of yayin, 10, 10, and 50 is 70. Visod nitam ba'ayin otiot. Also sod, which is secret, is samach and vav is 10. Samach is 60. Vav and dalet are 10. So you end up with 70. Nichnas yayin yatsa sod. So when wine comes in, the secrets come out. That's usually not considered a positive thing. But when you put the yayin in and the secrets don't come out, but you're very clear-headed and you know what you're doing, then it's a good thing. I see someone in the chat made a connection. I'm not able to read all the chats right now, but I see the connection between Noach being drunk, right? Here, God first, the wine is good for, right? It kind of, wine is good for you. It's like God after the Mabul, after the flood, but then Noach ends up getting drunk, and that's, the bad kind of drunk where he totally loses it. It's a bad thing. Okay, it just shows the two sides of everything, right? That everything's kind of two-sided. Okay, we have to think about where this connects to Eruvin and what this has to do with what we're learning. Because if you remember, you probably don't remember because it's hard to remember these things. How did we get to this? So we got to this because Rabbi Yehuda said in the name of Shmuel, two alachot. He talked about the sechiro and the lekito. Remember, the person who's just working in the house of the non-Jew can function on behalf of the non-Jew. And then we said, right, and Rav Nachman said, oh, that's a good law. And then he said, if you drink a little bit of, right, a revi'it of wine, a quarter log of wine, you already can't teach. And to that, Rav Nachman said, oh, that's a bad halacha, right? And then we went against Rav Nachman. You can't say that. You can't speak that way about Divrei Torah. I forgot to mention yesterday, someone reminded me about the zonot. They took it from the zonot pasuk, right? And I talked about how, people talk about, oh, that woman's beautiful, that woman's not. But also, it's zonot, zona'eh. It's a play on words. Zonot, the word zonot sounds like zona and zona, lonai. So in any case, right, we got here because of this chiro and lakito. Maybe there's a connection here about that this Gentile whose courtyard we're in, right? That on the one hand, the rabbi started viewing it as the Gentile might kill you, and we don't want you to associate with Gentiles. And then we come up with this halacha. Well, if the Jew works in his house, then already, if he's in the Gentile's house, we can give him rights, and then we can kind of avoid this halacha. Why can we avoid this halacha? Because it's interesting. It's the same idea here of being drunk. There's Gentiles of all kinds, right? There's some kinds, right? Just like you can get drunk and it can bring out good things, and you can get drunk and it can bring out bad things. There's Gentiles who might want to murder us, but there's other Gentiles who don't. So maybe there's a concept here of where the rabbis are trying to say this halacha is not so clear cut as we thought. And that's why they make all these loopholes to get around it, which we're going to see in all kinds of situations. And they started with the sechiro and lakito. We'll see some other cases where the rabbis allowed certain situations. So Again, it's about seeing things. There's always two sides to things. It's not always black and white. I think that's a connection, a good connector between the sugya here and there. Okay, moving on. Amar Rav Chanin lo nivra yayin ela. If wine is bad, then why was wine created? So here they give two reasons why wine is created. Ela lenachem avelim, okay, to help people who are really right, are very upset and mourning about their loved ones, and they need to just a little bit calm themselves down. That's a positive thing. U'lishalem sachar lerishaim. We always talk about if the rishaim can get their reward in this world, that's good because then they'll get punished in the next world. So they say, this is the reward for the rishaim, right? This basically means people like drinking; it makes them feel good, and that's great. But that's basically sachar lerishaim. Okay, it's not for the good people in this world, according to the Gemara. Shneimar. Now, where do we get this from? Mishlei. Tunu shechar laoved v'yayin l'marei nefesh. Give beer to the oved, the one who's lost, oved with an aleph, which is the rishaim, the evil people. The yayin l'marei nefesh, those who are sad, and struggling with their sadness, give them wine. Amar Rabbi Chanim bar Papa. Kol she'ein yayin nishpach betoch beito kimayim eino b'chlal bracha. If you don't have wine overwhelming in your house the way you have water, then you're obviously aren't blessed. How do we get this? What's the real blessing is to have overflowing wine in your house. It's fascinating, right? Even though they say wine has this bad nature to it, but because wine also has a good nature to it. And as Sarah says in the chat, exactly what I wanted to say, which is wine was their main drink, as we said yesterday. That was their staple, so it makes sense. This is a verse in Shmo, Perek Kaf Gimel. Ma lechem shenikach bekesef maaser, af mayim shenikach bekesef maaser. It's bread can be used to buy from your Maaser Sheni money. Remember, you go to Jerusalem and you redeem your fruit onto coins. You buy, and there's certain things you could buy, certain things you can't. Remember, you could do your Eruvin out of everything except water and salt. And likewise, your Maaser Sheni could be everything but water and salt. Although we saw maybe not everything, but basically water certainly can. So ma lechem shenikach bekesef Maaser Sheni, af mayim shenikach bekesef Maaser Sheni. And what kind of water can be bought with Maaser Sheni money? Yayin. And they call it water. So what do you see? The blessing is that you'll have water, but it really means it's wine like water. If you pour it in your house like wine, then like water, you have tons of it, then there's bracha. Last line, which is the clincher line, famous, you probably heard of it before. Amar Bilai b'shloshat barim adam yikar b'kaso u'b'kiso u'b'kaso. Right, it's play on words here. With your cup, right? What you're like when you drink is very revealing about you, or you could even say how much you drink or not. B'kiso, how you do business dealings, okay, or your money, what you do with your money, okay, or are you an honest? Most people think are you an honest business dealer? Ubikaso, and either whether you even ever get angry, right? We're all very amazed by people who just don't get angry. It's an amazing thing. Or what you're like when you're angry. We all know there's people that we want to be farthest away from when they get angry, right? They're scary. Some people even say what you laugh about, or you're laughing. You could say, right? You could also explain this differently. What makes you laugh even might be an indicator of what kind of person you are, what kind of jokes you like. Anyway. Okay, or when you're overly overjoyed, how you behave. Okay, what you do when you're in a super great mood, all those things are revealing about an individual. Okay, so again, I think it's possible to make this connection to the Gentile sugya and how there's two sides to everything. I also wanted to get back. I should have probably done it earlier when we finished I wasn't realizing as I was in the middle of teaching that we had finished the sugya about the davening, but I want to go back to the davening about whether one needs kavanah and tefillah. According to the sugya here, it sounds like if you're not able to focus properly on your davening, then it's like your davening is not a davening. So how do we relate to this? Because many of us are very distracted when we pray, and it's one of the biggest issues with prayer. It's very hard to be distracted, not to be distracted, and not to have thoughts come into your head and all sorts of things that distract you. So I wanted to read you a little bit in the Shulchan Aruch in Orach Chaim, Siman Tzadichet. It says, "Hamitpalel tzarich shechaven libo." Okay, first of all, he says, what does it mean, kavanat libo? That's another question. The first thing he says is perush hamilot. Okay, and in fact, it was always a thing that in many schools, they don't teach beirei tefillah. Now, one of the reasons they don't teach it's not the most fascinating thing to teach. It's hard to get the kids excited about it. On the other hand, it's impossible, right? My Maimonides school was known that they taught beirei tefillah. They had a course in it always, because that is very critical to understand what it is you're saying. Okay, it's really critical, and it's hard to understand. They don't really teach it in most of the schools. Anyway, so he needs to know what one is saying. And you feel like you're standing opposite God. Now, if you feel like you're standing opposite God, you're certainly going to be focusing on what you're saying. Right? You get all thoughts out of your head. Much easier said than done. Right? And then you think, oh, you imagine you're standing before a king, right? All the more so the King of Kings, etc. I'm not going to read the whole thing. Seif bet, he says, make sure you're not in a place like where there's beer or where there's, right, like we saw in those rabbis who said, don't go to a place like that. And not in an hour where you're really not focused. But then it says, but we're not really careful about all of this anymore. In other words, things have changed. We're not able to be focused on our prayer anymore. Now, I don't know what switched. Maybe it's based on that first line of our Gemara about things have changed, right? And once there was a destruction, we're so unhappy, and there's so much to worry about. Okay, I don't know that they didn't worry before that. But basically, he says this is no longer the case. Of course, the Mishnah Berurah comments there, that doesn't mean you could say, oh, well, this isn't relevant, and I could just say the words without thinking about them. Mishnah Berurah comments, and obviously, you shouldn't be angry when you're doing it, and you should try to get out all the thoughts you can. And, the halacha is that you're supposed to, at least in Shema, the beginning of Shema, and in the beginning, the first bracha of Shemona Esrei, you should try at least in certain times of the prayer to be very focused, even if you're not capable of doing it for all of prayer. Like there's an understanding that our ability to focus is not, either it's not the same as it was, or I don't know how to say it otherwise, but it seems like something changed somewhere and we're no longer obligated. Or again, we're obligated to try, but if we don't succeed, right, don't feel bad about it. And you're not alone. I think we're kind of all in that situation. Okay, Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav. So now we're getting back to our sugya. We'll pull up a picture here. Okay, we're in picture number 231. Okay, back to Eruvin. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav. So we started with Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel. That's what got us on this whole tangent. Now Rav Yehuda is saying in the name of Rav. He often quotes both of them. Remember, he's a second generation Tana who learned by both, Emora, who learned by both of them in Bavel. And he first learned by Rav, then later he learned by Shmuel, so he's always quoting from both. Yisrael v'nochri b'pnimit, v'Yisrael b'chitzona. Now we have a courtyard where there's a Jew and a non-Jew in the inner courtyard. Remember we talked about the inner and the outer, and how, because the inner crosses through to get out through the outer, but the outer never needs to go inside, remember? So if, let's say there were a bunch of Jews in the inner courtyard, they can make an eruv by themselves. They don't need the outer. But according to some opinions, the outer person can't make an eruv with just people in the outer courtyard without including the people in the inner courtyard, because the inner courtyard passes through, right? It's called drisat regel. They can walk right through his courtyard, and therefore it's a problem. So Rav Yehuda says in the name of Rav, what if there's a Yisrael and Nochri b'pnimit, the Yisrael b'chitzona? Okay, so the inner courtyard, now remember, we had a machloket Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. If it's just one Jew and a non-Jew, is that a problem? Remember, Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov said that's a very rare case because the non-Jew might kill the Jew and no one would know about it. So therefore, right, if the non-Jew kills the Jew in the inner courtyard here, no one, right? So here, actually, we're going to talk about this, that it's maybe more of an issue here. But theoretically, right, if they're living by themselves, then it's okay, according to Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. It's not okay, according to Rabbi Meir. He thinks no matter what, you have to buy out, rent out a space, not buy out, you have to rent out a space of the non-Jews courtyard. So Bama Selefni Rebbe Va'asal, he basically forbade this space unless they bought out the non-Jew, right? Both the outer and the inner. V'lifnei Rabbi Chia Va'asar, both of them forbade it, Rebbe and Rabbi Chia. Yativ Rabba v'Rabbi Yosef, b'shili Pirkei Rav Sheshet. So a few generations later, right, Rebbe and Rabbi Chia are Tanaim, Rabba and Rabbi Yosef are third generation Amoraim. They were learning at the end of Rav Sheshet's shir. The Yativ Rav Sheshet v'Kamar. Rav Sheshet said, "Kiman Amar Rav Lishmate." Right. So when Rav quoted this thing about Rebbe and Rabbi Chia, according to, is he saying this? Ki Rabbi Meir, was he holding like Rabbi Meir? And because he viewed it that here you have one non-Jew living with one Jew in the inner courtyard, and because of that, we're going to forbid this. Karkish Rabbi Reshe, he shook his head, yes. And therefore, yes, it's according to Rabbi Meir. So Amar of Yosef, Trey Gavre Ravrave Kirabanan Litu Bahai Milta. I can't believe these two great rabbis made a mistake in this understanding. Rav Sheshan and Rabbi, how could you make such a mistake? Rabbi Meir, Lama li Yisrael b'chitzona. You wouldn't, if you were trying to say we hold like Rabbi Meir, you would have just brought a case. Forget the outside of this courtyard, right? This, you would just bring a case of an Ochuyini Yisrael in a courtyard, and we'd say, it's forbidden. And if you want to say Maaseh Shaya Kachaya, maybe it was just describing the situation, a particular situation that had happened. No, but they asked Rav a different time. Pnimi bimkomo mahu. What about the pnimi in his place? Amar lahen mutal. He said, if the pnimi wants to carry in his own chatzir and he's living with this non-Jew, right? Even though there's a Yisrael outside, they can carry, right? He can carry from his courtyard, it's no problem, because the outer person doesn't have what we call drisat regel on the inside. The outer person never goes into that courtyard. And therefore, it's like one Jew living with a non-Jew. And there's a fear that maybe the non-Jew will kill the Jew and the Jew, no one would notice. And therefore, he would never live in a place like that with a non-Jew. Therefore, it's a rare case. And therefore, if it does happen, there's no reason to make a gzerah. And therefore, it's allowed. So what do you see? It must be, he holds like Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, because one, right, Rav himself holds like Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, so it can't be he holds like Rabbi Meir. So now we say, okay, so we tried to say maybe it's Rabbi Meir, and he doesn't care that it's only one living with the non-Jew in the inner courtyard, but then we say, no. It must be Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. So now you have to explain, right, it's tricky here, because on the one hand, the one non-Jew is kind of canceled by the Jew because we already said there's no reason to make a gzerah. On the other hand, there's another Jew in the picture here. Altogether, you do have two Jews. So therefore, we're going to view it as Elamai Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. So now we're going to say, wait. So now you're saying you hold like Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. We're going to view it as if it's not really one big courtyard, but since the two inner people can move to the outer courtyard, it's as if there's a Nechui Yisrael and a Yisrael in the outer courtyard. But Ha'amar, Ad Shu Shnei Yisraelim Osrim Zal Zeh. But Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov said it has to be a situation where the Yisraelim are forbidden to each other. And in this case, right, they're not really forbidden to each other. Again, well, we'll see. But we're going to say, Ela ki Rabbi Akiva. It must be like Rabbi Akiva da'amar, regel hamuteret b'mkoma, oseret shelo b'mkoma. Remember we learned that according to Rabbi Akiva, the person living on the inside, there's a debate about this case, whether the person living on the inside has to make an eruv with the person on the outside. Everyone agrees the inside person can carry on the inside. The question is the outside person, let's say there were a bunch of people in the outer courtyard, does he have to include the inner people in his courtyard? So Rabbi Akiva says, regel hamuteret b'mkoma, even though the Yisrael is allowed to carry in his own courtyard, he's oseret shelo b'mkoma. He forbids outside of his area, meaning if he has drisat regel in the outer courtyard, he can forbid the outer courtyard from carrying unless he's part of the eruv. So now basically what happens? Based on Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, the inner courtyard, the Jew is allowed to carry. But when the Jew goes to the outer, since the Jew can go into the outer courtyard, he forbids the outer courtyard. And then because of that, we view this whole situation as two, when you look at the outer courtyard is basically made up of two Jews and a non-Jew. And therefore, until you rent from the person, it's a problem. But now they say, but forget about the non-Jew. If already we said that the Jew forbids the outer Jew, then lama li nochri, afilu Yisrael nami. Let's say the courtyard was just filled with Jews. They would forbid the outer courtyard in any case because they have drisat regel there. So obviously, what do they answer? Amarav Huna, Bereid Rav Yoshua, La'olam ki Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov v'chol Rabbi Akiva, as we just explained a minute ago. The case was that they made an eruv. In other words, the inner courtyard forbids the outer courtyard just because they're Jews and because they have drisat regel, but they can make an eruv. So let's say they made an eruv and they resolved that issue. But now we have a separate problem, which is the non-Jewish issue. In other words, we now have they did an eruv together, but they can't do an eruv because there's a non-Jew here, because now we view them all as one unit, basically, because the inner people forbid the outer. And you now have a case of, it's not, originally they thought that maybe because it's only one Jew in the outer courtyard, maybe it's a classic case of there's one non-Jew inside that's a problem and there's one Jew outside, and maybe it's 1 and 1, but they say no. Since the Jews on the inner courtyard forbid because they have drisat regel, we view the Jews as one group, and now there's a Gentile, and we basically have to say it's a group of Jews with a Gentile. Even if the Jews do an Eruv, the Gentile is going to forbid them unless they can rent the space from the Gentile. Okay, so that's why this goes all back to explain why Rabbi Yehuda said in the name of Rav that in this case, Rabbi Chia and Rebbe all forbade carrying here unless they were able to rent the space from the non-Jew. And then V'tamadi Ikanochri Da'asir, right? Since they did the Eruv, it's only now, the only problem is because of this Gentile. Avalei Kanochri Lo Asir. Okay, that's the end of this case. Now we have another case. Ba'mine Rabbi Eliezer Mirav. Rabbi Eliezer asked, or actually I think it should be Rabbi Elazar. Yeah, Rabbi Elazar asked Rav, Yisrael v'nochri b'chitzona, v'Yisrael b'pnimit mahu. What if it's the reverse? Okay, so I'll show you the picture. They don't do a picture of exactly this, but it's just the reverse of this case. What if you have Yisrael and Anochri in the outer courtyard and the Jew in the inner courtyard? Mahu. Do you say, Hatam tama mishum d'shchiach d'dayar d'mirtat nochri? In the previous case, what did we say? We're going to assume that it is common for Jews to live in this way. Why? Okay, in the case, one second, I just want to get it totally straight before I say it so I don't get confused for a minute. Right, in the case where they share the inner courtyard, do we say, look, they'll live there? Why? Because normally we're worried that he's going to kill him, right? But here we're going to say, if the Nochri were to kill the Jew in the inner courtyard, what would happen? Basically, what's the Nochri's best excuse? If the Gentile kills the Jew, he says, oh, I didn't kill the Jew. The Jew walked out on his own. Someone else killed the Jew. I don't know. So the idea is they say, he would say, say, where's that Jew that was with you? And he'll say, I don't know, he left. Now, in the case where the two of them are living inside and there's a Jew living outside, he can't say he left. The Jew who's living outside would notice that he had left, which means that we view this all as if two people are living there. But if the Jew's living on the inside and outside you have a Gentile and a Jew living, the Gentile could say, if the Gentile kills the Jew, the Gentile could say, oh, the Jew walked out. I don't know, the inner guy comes and says, where's the Jew that was living with you? We'll say, I don't know, he left. And the inner guy will never know, right, that he left or not. Here you can say, in this case, you could say, nafik azale. Oh, he left, and no one would ever know. So maybe that's not considered two Jews and a Gentile. Maybe it's really just one and a Gentile. Or maybe you say, oh, dilma hachinami mirtat desavar hashta ate Yisrael v'chazeli. No, maybe here you're also you would say there is a fear because what's the issue? There's a guy living on the inside. He could at any point walk out, and maybe while he's in the middle of murdering him, the inner guy will come out, pass right through, and see him, get caught, catch him in the act. So you could view it in two ways. Okay, so therefore, what is it? Basically, say we're going to be lenient in this case. Okay, I'm sorry. One second. Oh no, sorry. They say it's better to be stringent, is what they're saying. Okay, and therefore they're going to say, right, give a chacham and he'll be even smarter, meaning let's just be more stringent about this. Rish Lakish, next case. Okay, so we're going to view it basically that you have to rent the space from the Gentile in that case. Now they're going to bring a case that happened. Rish Lakish v'talmidei Rabbi Chanina iklu lahu punda. They came to an inn. Below hava socher v'hava maskir. Okay, they didn't tell you the details, but the picture shows it in picture 232. There's two Jews living in the courtyard, and there's a non-Jewish renter. So now the non-Jew wasn't there, but the landlord was there. Hava maskir, the landlord was there. So Amru ma'u l'megar minei, can we rent from the landlord? So now they say it depends on the situation. It depends on the relationship, and really I would say the contract between the renter and the landlord. If he doesn't have rights to kick him out, then for sure, there's no question. Of course you can't buy rights. But if he could kick him out of the space, then the question is, since he can kick him out, therefore we can rent the space from him. He has rights to it. Or do you say, no, but he hasn't kicked him out right now, so he has no rights to the house right now, right? If I am renting a house, the landlord can just come into my house whenever he wants. So therefore, maybe he really doesn't have any rights here and therefore not. Amar lam Rish Lakish, interesting answer. Niskor, let's rent from him. And next time we happen to see the rabbis, we'll check it out. Okay, but let's just do it anyway, which is interesting, right? What's the reason? Because again, this is all derabanan, it's all rabbinic, so we can be lenient. And in fact, Atu Shale Rabbi Yafas, Amar Lehem Yafas Sitem Shesachartem. We said, good job. That was the right answer, which was good because they already did it. Rabbi Chanina bar Yosef, Rabbi Chia bar Abba, Rabbi Yasi Iklu Lahu Pundak. They also came to an inn. To Ate Nochri Mari de Pundak B'Shabte. Here there was a different situation. It was that the non-Jew who was living in that house wasn't there, and then he shows up. Amr on Shabbat. So now they want to know, Ma'u Lemegar Minei. Can we rent from him on Shabbat? Here are the two issues. Now it seems weird. You're renting, but on the other hand, we said it's a schirut re'uah. It's a very weak rental. It's not like you're making a contract. So maybe you could do it on Shabbat. So they say like this: do we view him? Socher k'ma'arev dami. He's like one who does an eruv. Mama arev mi ba'od yom af socher mi ba'od yom. Just like you put up an eruv from before Shabbat, you also have to do the schirah from before Shabbat. O Dilma, or here's the other way of looking at it. Socher k'mevatel reshut. It's just like, remember, if a Jew forgets to join the courtyard, he can just say on Shabbat, oh, I'm giving you rights. So maybe it's the same thing with the non-Jew. It's like bitul reshut. We know it's not. You need more than that. But maybe it can also be done on Shabbat, just like bitul reshut. Mama vatel reshut afilu b'Shabbat, af socher vafilu b'Shabbat. So maybe you can. Rabbi Chanina bar Yosef amar niskor, Rabbi Asi amar lo niskor. So they had a debate. One said yes, one said no. Amar lam Rabbi Chia bar Abba nismocha devrei zaken. Let's rely on Rabbi Chanina bar Yosef the zaken. V'niskor, and let's allow it. Again, you see a leniency here. Shailu leila Rabbi Yochanan amar lam yafeh asitem shesachartem. Okay, good job that you did this. However, we're gonna start with a big question on this tomorrow. So you're kind of left hanging right now. We think it's okay, but we'll see tomorrow that maybe it wasn't so okay what they did. That's it for today. Have a great day, everyone.